Hello, I'm Christopher Bayliss from FastGrowth Online. Thank you for downloading the FastGrowth workbook entitled Develop a Strong Business Model. Today I'm with David Ralph from Picture My Story. David, thank you for giving up some valuable time.
Thank you, Christopher.
Before we start, just tell us briefly what you do.
Our resource transforms the way children's writing is taught and learnt around the world. And it allows children to create a story while providing scaffolding for punctuation, which allows them to transcribe the story with confidence.
Thanks, David. So that's Picture My Story. Today we're focusing on develop a strong business model, and the structure of this particular little meeting is what's the context of why this is important in any business, big or small, and then secondly, when you've downloaded the workbook, some 3 or 4 valuable tips on how to make the most of it. Okay, so why is this workbook so important to any business person, business leader, developing a strong business model? David, we're in an agricultural area of Britain, okay? Lots of ploughing and pulling of tractors going on. 120 years ago, the thing that you'd have seen on the landscape, chugging across the landscape, was one of these, a steam engine. Lovely, isn't it? Okay, these were made in eastern England at the time. Very expensive, one per farm, the big farms, and they use them for ploughing in a special way and also for threshing. The rest of the work was done by horses. They cost a fortune to buy, they cost a fortune to run with all the coal, because they're run by coal, it's an external combustion engine, and to do ploughing you need 2 of these and probably a gang of 3 or 4 people. But they were incredibly efficient compared with horses, yeah?
Exactly, yes.
Sitting in America about 100 years ago was an engineer, very creative engineer. His name was Henry Ford. And he looked at this traction engine and he said, we could do better than that at Ford. And do you know what he did? He stuck the engine from the Model T, you remember the Model T car, on a chassis and came up with a thing very similar to a traction engine called a tractor. The famous blue Ford tractor, okay? That's a more modern one, but that's what it was. And this thing, different business model, different technology, different everything. One man, low cost to buy, could outperform one of those any day. So although it was a product change, but it was also a business model change, and that transformed the fortunes of the Ford tractor company. Make sense?
Yes.
So David, you've been in big companies as well as your own smaller company, which is growing very fast. Can you think of some big companies or maybe an industry that's really adopted a stronger business model and is doing really well?
Yes, I would say the budget airlines, such like Ryanair, Southwest Airlines in the States, EasyJet, they've really transformed that industry.
Through their model.
Yes.
And the established players, state-owned airlines, have really struggled, barely profitable.
Yeah.
Very important. Okay, so that's the context of why this is important. What we're going to do now is just share a few hints and tips for you who've downloaded this workbook to make the most of it. David, can you just read the purpose and goal of this particular workbook, please?
To develop a strong business model. The purpose of the workbook is to assist you to assess your company's current business model and then plan how to strengthen it. The goal is that within 12 months, through your stronger business model, you substantially increase your profitability by doing the right things.
Okay, and that's what the purpose is and that's the goal. And for a small to medium-sized company, get this right, you can certainly transform a business within 12 to 18 months. It takes slightly longer with a larger company, but it's that valuable. The 3 hints I'm going to focus on page 1, I'll just read it a little bit, is what is a business model? Well, it's a blueprint that defines how you're going to make money and operate. But much more importantly, it defines how you create value for the customer. That's the important thing. So this is all about creating value. And if you think of these people here, the Ford tractor created a lot more value for the farmer than these things.
Yes, exactly.
So that's hint number one. Constantly think about who is my customer, what does my customer need or require to have done, and how can we in my company create more value for them. On page 2, David, is assess your company's current business model. And the framework that we've created is in 5 parts. Part 1 is customer focus, i.e. the who. Number 2, as I said before, is the value provided to the customer. Number 3 is managing customer relationships. All brilliant stuff. And then on the next page, David, you could just read those.
Resources applied with what? Margin generated, how much?
Okay, and what we do in this workbook on page 2 and 2A is to ask you to rate yourself on those subsets there. For each block, rate yourself on a scale 1 to 10, where 1 is barely adequate and 10 is outstanding, and then to assess the strength of your current model and come up with a rating, an overall rating. Make sense?
Yes.
And you can either do it individually and come up with a cumulative score, or just look at it and say, actually, I think this is about a 7, that's about an 8. Just to see on those 5 factors where you are. Make sense?
Yes.
Easy to do. I can see you've done some work with your company there with some scores there. Can I just borrow that for a moment? This is for Picture My Story, which is a startup company, so it's early days yet. You can see some of the scores that David's come up with. Individual scores and then the sort of average scores, 6, 7, 5. And then over the next page, the resources applied, that 3 out of 10, and margin generated, 7 out of 10. Makes sense? And also your total business score on the bottom. Thank you for sharing that with me. And the third hint is on page 3, David, which says define where you are vulnerable. All companies, big and small, are vulnerable. To actually consciously go through this process and say, what are the key weaknesses in my current business model? Mm-hmm. What would a competitor need to do to destroy your business? Similar to your business, what would a competitor need to do to destroy Picture My Story? If we were starting again, as you kind of are, what would you do differently? What are the constraints? You've certainly got some constraints in terms of investment, I guess, and other points of vulnerability. Many businessmen don't do this, but it's important, I think, in terms of coming up with a model.
Yeah, it really helps.
Yeah, and then pull it all together on page 4. It's pull it all together, the stuff we've done, come up with a new model and a new rating. And most importantly, then, having done that as the business leader, share it with your team. In your case, it's your small team, if it's a bigger team,
yes,
and so forth. It's as simple as that. And I believe that by doing that, we can become the next Ryanairs of our industry. Would you like to become the Ryanair of your industry?
I'd love to, Christopher.
Okay, so that's it. It's easy to do, this workbook, and highly valuable. May I wish you every success going forward.
Thank you very much.